What's up everybody, and welcome to my channel. In this video, I want to tell you how I prepare for one of the most rigorous exams out there. Namely, I'm going to give you insights into my journey preparing for the USMLE Step 1. If you don't know me yet, my name is KenMed, and I'm a fourth year medical student studying in the Netherlands. In my previous video, I've already told why I am preparing for the USMLE Step 1. So if you haven't seen that video yet, make sure to check it out. But in this video, I want to tell you how I do that. I'm going to do that by listing all the resources that I use, tell you my study strategy, and at the end of this video, I'm also going to tell you some tips and tricks. I know that there are a lot of YouTubers out there that make similar videos, or they make videos about studying for the USMLE Step 1. I feel like the internet has been a little oversaturated with these videos. On the other hand, I also believe that every study experience is unique and you can learn an important lesson from almost any video out there. And for myself, YouTube has been a great tool to gain more knowledge and more information about the whole process. So I hope that by telling you my story and how I prepare for it, it will be useful to you at some point. Okay, so let's jump right into it. I have divided my study schedule into 3 phases. The first phase is the explorative phase, the second phase is the solidification phase, and the third phase is the review phase. And as we go through those, I will tell you in more details what they actually mean. But the explorative phase, to start off with, is the phase where you want to familiarize yourself with all the topics that will be examined. Especially for international students, it can be a little bit overwhelming as to what to study for this exam. So I think it's important to take out some time to actually go over all the topics that you can be examined on and to get familiar with them. And a great tool for that is first aid. And I'm gonna pick up my copy of first aid. So this is first aid. And I feel like every student who is studying for this exam should be familiar with it, because it's one of the most important resources out there. And yeah, it's basically the Bible for Step 1. It contains this very condensed and high yield information about all the topics that you need to know for Step 1. However, I think it can be a little bit overwhelming in the beginning when you study for it, because it doesn't do a lot of explanation. It just states the facts as they are. And if you're rusty on certain topics, it can be very difficult to understand first aid. So that's why I've used first aid in conjunction with an online lecture series. The lecture series is by RX, so USMLE RX. They have an online platform where you can watch their express videos. And in these videos, they will explain every single paragraph in first aid. I usually watch those videos, and as I'm watching those, I highlight the things in first aid, or I make extra notations in first aid. This process can be very time consuming, and if you have a lot of time, you could go over all the chapters in first aid in this fashion. However, if you have limited time, make sure to choose only the chapters that you find most difficult. I came to this conclusion after a few months when I realized, like, no, this is going to take too much time. So now I've only decided to do a few more chapters in this manner, and after that I'm going to focus more on questions, because questions at the end of the day are, in my opinion, the most important thing. Another tool that is very important for your basic understanding of content that is going to be examined is Pathoma. And this is the Pathoma book. It's actually called The Fundamentals of Pathology, and it's written by Dr. Sitar, and it comes with an online lecture series as well that is taught by Dr. Sitar himself. And it's basically a basic pathology, pathophysiology course that covers the fundamentals of this field. And I feel like since the USMLE Step 1 is so much based on pathology, it's really useful to use this tool, because Dr. Sitar will go over all the basics of pathology in a very clear and concise way. And he will actually explain the topics in such great fashion that you will understand them and hence remember them. I'm personally a big fan of his teaching, because in some way or another, he really makes sure that his students understand the topics. And I just feel like the knowledge that I've gained from his videos are useful even outside of Step 1 for me as a physician, because the pathology is such an important area for your basic understanding of how diseases develop. Another thing that you can do in this explorative phase is make flashcards, and I use these kind of paper flashcards, and And on one side, I write down a question for myself, and on the other side, I write down the answer. And I find it very, very useful because this is an active process. So by actively writing knowledge down, it's easier to remember it later. In this phase, however, I'm not really focusing on the memorization part as much. I'm just writing it down, and I'm going to memorize these flashcards later in the solidification phase. And in the solidification phase, I will also create new flashcards. Some people are more into online flashcards, such as Anki. However, I feel like those are not very personal and they can be a little bit out of context, so I'm not a really big fan of that. But if that's your thing, then you should definitely go for it. Even though I've called this phase explorative phase, I think it's still important to go through some questions, because practice questions are the most important thing that will help you to ace the exam, because you need to practice the types of questions that will be on the real exam as much as possible. So you cannot start with that too early. In this phase, however, I don't use the best question bank out there, that is UWorld. I save those questions for later down the line, but right now I'm using the RX question banks, which are decent questions. They're a little bit easier than the UWorld questions, as I've heard from other YouTubers, but they're still good questions, and once you do all the questions, they give you detailed explanations as to why certain questions are wrong or right. So I think it's a great practice tool in this phase. Something else that is important in this explorative phase is to write down all the topics that you come across in your resources that you find difficult, such as the topics that you come across in first aid, in Pathoma, in RX. Write those down and make sure to go over those extra in your solidification phase. And you can also write down certain recurrent question themes that you see in the question bank. So for example, what I've come across a lot is questions about hepatitis B serology a lot in my question banks. So I wrote that down in my list, and I will make sure to go over that in the solidification phase, so I won't forget to emphasize on topics that are frequently asked in the exam. Okay, so now let's talk about the solidification phase. In this phase, I think the most important thing for you to do is actually do practice questions. A lot of people out there tell you this, but I really want to reiterate this point, because practice questions are the only things that will simulate the actual exam. So it doesn't matter how much you read first aid, how many times you go over Pathoma videos. If you don't practice the questions, you will not get a good score. So that's why I want to make sure to dedicate enough time for practice questions. And as I told you earlier, I'm intending to buy the UWorld question bank in a few weeks maybe. And I will do, and once I've bought that question bank, I want to do at least 40 to 80 questions every day. And in the weekend, I want to go over topics that I found difficult, or topics that I've come across in the questions repetitively. So I will spend the weekends actually reviewing and lecturing myself and teaching myself content. And during the week itself, I will only do questions. During the solidification phase, I will also continue making new flashcards and actually memorizing those flashcards. The flashcards that I showed you earlier are really useful because you can bring them with you anywhere. You can take them on the bus. You can just keep them with you in your pocket whenever you're just chilling in someone's place. They're really useful. Really good YouTube channel that I'm using currently and that I will definitely use during the solidification phase is Dirty Medicine. This YouTube channel is created by this guy who explains difficult USMLE topics in a very understandable way. He just wants to make sure that you remember it. So even if you don't understand it as much, he will tell you the high yield points and make sure that you memorize them, because at the end of the day, you need a certain level of memorization for this exam anyway. During the solidification phase, I will also go over first aid again, and during the explorative phase, I've accumulated a lot of notes in my first aid book, so it's a pretty complete book by the end of the explorative phase. So it's really nice to go over that again during the solidification phase. And if you have the time, make sure to go over it twice or thrice. This can be a little bit faster than in the beginning of the process because you're already familiar with the topic and you can skip over certain things that you find very easy. But I think it's still important to go over first aid at least a few times, because at the end of the day, the examiners, they just take out information straight from first aid mostly. And lastly, another thing that I will do in the solidification phase is to draw out important medical concepts or really elaborate medical concepts. I'm not really a visual learner, I would say, but I'm somebody who likes to draw out or to write down things as I'm studying. In medicine, there are a lot of difficult and elaborate processes such as the coagulation cascade, or lipid metabolism, etc. And it's really nice to write those down or draw them out and make posters out of them. And I want to create those posters and maybe stick them on my wall or on my door, and then constantly exposing myself to that information. So that's a plan that I have for the future. Okay, so finally, we reached the review phase. In this phase, I think it's still important to keep on doing practice questions, because practice questions, as I told you, are the most important. So even until the last few days before your exam, you should be doing practice questions. That's just my opinion. But I think it's also important to go over the rapid review section in first aid. Really go over all your flashcards multiple times. Make sure to really memorize that information. And another important thing that you should be doing at this point is prepare yourself for the logistical part of the examination. Make sure to prepare a cheat sheet. That is a sheet that you can write down at the beginning of the actual exam and that you can use throughout the whole exam. So if you have already drawn that out or written that down a few times, it saves you time on the real exam. Yeah, just make sure you have all the important things on exam day so you don't have to worry about that then. So finally, I'm going to share some tips and tricks with you. First of all, I really want to reiterate this point. Practice, practice, practice. Really use practice questions, because that's the most important factor in my opinion. So you cannot start too early with that. Even in the explorative phase, make sure to have at least one question bank that you can use. Another tip that I will give is watch many YouTube videos of other people's study strategy, because I'm just giving you my story, but there are a lot of other YouTubers out there with very good stories, very good strategies. By watching many different YouTubers, you can customize your own study strategy. Another thing that is important is to make a study plan before you study for the USMLE. Because it's such a long process, you need a sort of timeline for your studying. It's okay to make changes to that study plan as you go through it. You don't have to stick to it all the way. You can make some alterations. It's a dynamic process. There are different things happening in your life constantly, so you cannot stick fully to it. I'm totally aware of that. And finally, I want to talk about Sketchy, because as you might have noticed, I have not mentioned Sketchy in the list of resources that I've used or that I'm planning to use. And even though Sketchy Medicine is used by so many students, I'm not a big fan of it, because I did the trial, so the free promo. I went through the videos that were available in that trial, and I realized that I did not remember the information in those videos that well. Those images, the cartoons that Sketchy makes, did not really stick in my brain, so I decided I'm not going to pay that much money for that tool, even though many people are using it. So I think that's also an important lesson. Don't just follow other YouTubers or other people. Make sure to check out if something works for you, and understand what type of learner you are. We are all unique individuals, and some things that work for some people do not automatically work for you. And also make sure to pick and choose the resource that you want to use. There are a lot of resources out there. There are a lot of companies out there trying to sell you stuff, but if you go over all of those, it takes too much time, and B, it costs a lot of money. So yeah, that's partially the reason why I have not bought Sketchy, and I'm not intending to. Yeah, so this was my video about how I study for USMLE Step 1. I hope you found it useful and fun to watch. If you liked it, make sure to put a thumbs up, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment. If you have any questions or anything I can help you with, let me know, and I hope I see you the next time.